Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this Clown Decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And today, it is yet another white-pilling moment, where clearly there is ever more opposition to half-hearted socialism that we are getting from the Labour Party at the moment. Not because it is not socialist enough, but because it is too socialist, thank God for that. So yesterday there were pictures like this all over the news, of over 10,000 farmers going to Westminster to protest the fact that this idiot government has decided to apply inheritance tax onto family farms because they are paper rich but cash poor. In other words, the land that they farm is worth an awful lot of money because potentially, they could sell it to developers and things like that. But in reality, it really doesn't make that much money per year. So let's go through a few highlights of what was seen there. First up, Reform were all there, pretty much all their MPs, showing massive support for the farming community, as they would do, as they had an entire page dedicated to saying exactly what they would do to help out the farmers in their contract. And Farage was going around interviewing all different types of ordinary farmers that were there present at the protest, asking them how they feel about this particular policy, sort of guiding them in the direction of, aren't Labour awful? Don't we need a government here that will be willing to protect farmers, because having family farms is kind of the lifeblood of the countryside. I wish I could show you a number of clips. Unfortunately, this was a Twitter broadcast, and for some reason that is the most impossible thing in the world to actually rip. So unfortunately, I'm only going to be able to give you one clip, but I will say it was very good optics from Reform, this entire protest. Especially with this clip that I did manage to find.
Now, young farmers. William, you're 12 years old, and this says, supporting British farming. So how much does this matter to you?
A lot. I think without today, Starman don't know how important this is to us.
Yeah, it really is farmer v Starmer, isn't it, today? So you come from a farming family, yeah?
Yes.
And what do your parents do?
My dad's a farmer and my mum works in a pub.
But what do they farm?
My dad farms cows, sheep, just normal animals.
And you help out on the farm?
Yes.
And do you want to be a farmer when you're older?
Yeah.
William, you're going to be a farmer. We're going to win this campaign.
It's just perfect optics. I think the most important thing is that this kid fully knows what his parents do. I mean, when I was his age, I don't think I could tell you what my parents did. They're in software. I don't even think I knew that at age 12. And clearly this kid enjoys helping out around the farm where he can do with his dad, probably goes to the pub with his mum sometimes as well. And Farage has most definitely planted his flag in with the farmers, trying obviously to get that rural Tory vote. And naturally, as the day progressed, the protest got bigger and bigger and bigger. But I think the only bit of contentious protesting I saw was this clip from a tractor trying to get through a police barricade.
The tractor's going.
This was literally a couple of tractors being told basically to stop by police, but they weren't having any of it. According to the Times, the farmers that did this were reprimanded. As far as I'm concerned, that was the police doing their job. They had been given permission to protest in certain areas. These tractors tried to get out of it, go beyond it, and if you do that, you're breaking the agreement you have with the local council and the police, and of course you're going to get reprimanded. However, leftists went absolutely nuts with this. A lot obviously saying, oh, what about Just Stop Oil? You guys didn't like Just Stop Oil doing this, which basically nobody said that they should be doing this. But the most crazy ones from leftists were tweets like this: the Metropolitan Police shot Chris Cabba for less than what this farmer's doing today. Which I think is one of the most insane things I've ever read in my life. This tractor was not trying to run over these police officers. He stopped, waited for them to move, and basically crawled very slowly. Chris Cabba put it in first and put his foot down on the accelerator, while also spending half an hour evading police. Yeah, there's quite a difference there, but these people don't care. They want to get every single talking point that they can out there. This is just an insane thing to say. But luckily there were much better optics throughout the day, just families going about with their signs effectively saying, please can these city folk understand that you are killing farming, family farming especially, by doing this, which are typically not owned by billionaires. Obviously on paper they will be millionaires because the land that they farm is worth millions, but the problem with that, as I say, is that if they sell it as a farm, it's not going to sell for millions because it's turning a profit of maybe a few grand a year. And that's if they don't have any disasters. So effectively they're being taxed on unrealised gains when they die, and it's just an absolutely ridiculous piece of legislation, which, don't worry, we'll get into the detail of it later. But the best optics by far were these children on their little toy tractors, making very much the point that even when they're young, they are... Literally every farmer's child has one of these, by the way, one of these pedal tractors. But they are already effectively trying to copy their parents. They see, obviously, their parents in tractors, going around doing all the farming stuff that they do in tractors, and they are perfectly happy to copy them at the tender young age of, probably not even 6, some of these kids. And it's very hard to say to a child, yes, we are going to ruin your dreams, isn't it? But that's exactly what Labour are doing. Anyway, quite a few celebrities turned up. Obviously the big one was Jeremy Clarkson, but first you had musical theatre guru Andrew Lloyd Webber come along to the protest to say his piece.
I found Lord Andrew Lloyd Webber is down here this morning. It is cold, it is wet, but you are down here. Why?
Well, I farm about just under 5,000 acres myself, but I'm not here because of me or anything like that. I'm here to support the small farmers. I mean, they are the absolute salt of the earth. They're the people who really keep our countryside going.
And this is the thing that an awful lot of the woke leftists, if you want to put it like that, don't understand. They see that these celebrity millionaires are there, and they just instantly go to, they just don't want to pay inheritance tax. When the reality of the situation is that these people, Jeremy Clarkson, Lord Andrew Lloyd Webber, even Reform, even Tories, and surprisingly, well, not particularly surprisingly if you know the politics, Lib Dems, they're all doing it to help out, obviously, the politicians, their constituents, but the celebrities, they just know these people. These will be their friends that they know that are affected by this, who do not have it as well as they do because they're not celebrities. And they will know that for years they have planned to keep the farm in a decent state for their children to inherit it, and now that's all gone through the window because 20% of the worth of the farm will have to be paid to the government, which on average looks like it's going to be about 10 years worth of profit for your average farm, which is just a ridiculous ask. A completely ridiculous ask. And so to a lot of people on the right, it looks like a kind of 4D chess move by Labour to actually try and get them to sell land so that they can develop on it. When in reality, I think it's just because they're stupid morons who don't understand second-order effects. If they don't understand second-order effects in most of the things they do, why would they understand this particular second-order effect?
I am a passionate, lover of the countryside. In my way, I've done what I can with my farm, which we've farmed now for 40 years, quietly. We don't bang the drum about that. But I'm here to really entirely for the small farmers, not for myself.
And I completely agree with him. I've always lived in, if not rural areas, certainly right next to them. And as much as I am, for all my sins, a bit of a yimby, I can completely understand why people would want to keep these small family farms going, if not just for food security, which at the moment I think we import about 40% of our food. These are the type of people that keep the countryside beautiful. These are the type of people looking after those areas of outstanding natural beauty. And even just ignoring all of these practical reasons to not have it, just on a moral level, it is not just... Inheritance tax itself isn't just, but especially with farmers, it is not just to effectively groom some of your children into being the best farmers that they can be, only to then effectively force most of them out of that career because they literally can't afford the government tax bill that has just been given to them. And obviously your standard leftist line is, we all get shafted by inheritance tax, why shouldn't they? It's always, we should take more. It is never, let's make it easier for everyone. It especially is ironic when it comes from incredibly wealthy leftists, like, I don't know, Dale Vince or something like that, who are the type of people that can easily afford these things, and so they just assume everyone can actually easily afford these things, and it will actually just carry on, and they're just being greedy. Which is really ironic, because Dale Vince's companies all get subsidised by the government, so really, it's him being a bit of a greedy man who really just wants all this wealth extracted so that it can go to his companies. Anyway, as mentioned before, Jeremy Clarkson was indeed one of the main attractions of this particular protest. As I'm sure everyone knows by now, he has done 3 series of his documentary/comedy series, Clarkson's Farm, where he learns the ropes of exactly how to farm, tries to find innovative ways of how to farm, to the point where he's actually helped invent a way for mother pigs to stop crushing their newborns. And he has won farming awards, and he is basically seen as the representative of farmers, so it's no surprise that he was there, despite his doctors saying, "You've just had a heart attack, please don't do anything stressful like this." Anyway, he ignored them and had a bit of a go at the BBC.
So why are you here, Mr. Clarkson?
Well, because I'm here to support farmers.
Right. Are you angry?
It's difficult to be angry on somebody else's behalf. That's like being... Yes, no, I'm not angry on someone else's behalf.
Right. So it's not about you. It's not about your farm and the fact that you bought a farm to avoid inheritance tax.
Instantly from Victoria, Derbyshire here, it is ridiculous personal attacks on Clarkson. Because in the first series of Clarkson's Farm, he does say that he basically bought the farm to avoid inheritance tax. But as he makes clear before she even gets to that planned attack, he's saying, "Oh, this is about other people. Oh, are you angry? Not really. I can't really find it easy to be angry on other people's behalf, but I do want to do what I can to help them, because they are angry." And instantly it's to the, "Oh yeah, but really is this just to avoid your inheritance tax?" And instantly that annoys Clarkson, instantly it's clearly a standoff, and so Clarkson treats it like a standoff.
Classic BBC there, classic. Oh yeah, it's not the fact that I bought a farm to avoid inheritance tax. The fact.
I will say in Victoria Derbyshire's defence here, it was said on Clarkson's Farm, so as far as Victoria Derbyshire's aware, yeah, that is a fact. However, Jeremy takes the chance to actually clarify this.
You told the Sunday Times in 2021 that's why you bought it.
These people.
Sorry?
BBC. Okay, let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
I think it's worth bearing in mind here that Jeremy Clarkson does have more of a visceral hatred for the BBC than most other people, because he was never particularly treated well by them. It's pretty much an open secret that the BBC wanted to get rid of Top Gear when he was, well, the main presenter of it for some years, because he caused a few controversies. Some were kind of nothing, others were, generally it's quite bad to punch a producer. That's what he got sacked over. But this will be a man who was in meetings with the BBC constantly, told, "Oh, stop having controversies for things that were just funny," like some of the controversies were over funny jokes. And he's well aware that BBC News are not a great place to actually get your information from. But the other thing is that he's an argumentative showman, so he knows this is going to be on television, and he knows that right from the start this has been an interview to try and attack him rather than actually get anything interesting out of him. So he's just on the attack, which I don't blame him for.
I wanted to shoot, okay? That's even worse to the BBC. I wanted to shoot, which comes with the benefit of not having to pay inheritance tax. Now I do.
Yes, and I can believe that. If you own farmland, you can have space to grow pheasants and eventually set them off in the wild to, shoot them. It's a sport. It is unbelievably normal in the countryside. I know plenty of places that have pheasants all over the road because they breed them, specifically to shoot. However, as he says, it came with the added benefit of also avoiding inheritance tax. And the point he goes into is to say, because I'm so rich, I had many options to avoid this inheritance tax.
But people like me will simply put it in a trust. And so long as I live for 7 years, that's fine. And as my daughter said, you will live for 7 years. You might be in a deep freeze at the end of it, but you will live for 7 years. But it's incredibly time-consuming to have to do that. And why should all these people have to do that?
Yes, as Clarkson says, he could just put all his money in a trust fund, including the farm, and that will avoid inheritance tax anyway, but the problem is that it's just a massive pain to have to do that. And these people are farmers. They work from dawn till dusk, sometimes, because I've seen it with my own eyes, throughout the night as well. It is an incredibly laborious job. This is why they get subsidies, this is why they get some tax breaks, and this is why it's absolutely absurd to try and punish them in this way. And as Clarkson says, this isn't about him and his inheritance tax, because he has just said how he will avoid it. So this doesn't matter to him. No, this matters to the people who are his friends, business partners. I mean, if you actually watch Clarkson's farm, Clarkson clearly has a really, really deep care and profound attitude to all the farmers around him who do it for a living. As he constantly says in the show, I'm not a real farmer, really, but having done this, I am understanding to a deep level all the problems that they are facing that I don't have to personally face, because he makes millions off Top Gear royalties, off the Grand Tour, off other shows he's hosted, obviously doing Clarkson's farm itself. And other farmers that are on there say, yeah, we all have extra jobs to just make sure the income's consistent, and this is why Clarkson's here. Because he understands that these will be farms that have been going on for generations. He'll have seen their family and their kids who are expecting, really, to take over the farm at some point. And as Clarkson says, it is possible to avoid all this nonsense by putting it in trust funds, but at that point, what was the point in doing this in the first place then? What's the point in putting the inheritance tax on if everyone's just going to avoid it? And it just makes a massive pain for everyone. And of course, it'll cost as well, that, because you'll probably have to hire solicitors and things like that to make sure that the trust fund's all legal and not going to be touched by the government's sticky hands.
So one of the reasons Rachel Reeves says she brought this in is to stop wealthy people using it as a way.
No, that was the only reason she did.
Well, no, the other reason was to raise money for public services.
On a personal point, specifically, let's not say public services, that is not what was said. It was the NHS. Farmers have to give up their family tradition, their generational farms, because we want to fund the NHS for, I think it was about an extra 24 hours. An extra day's worth of NHS funding is what this will bring in. If Labour are happy to completely destroy the countryside, to have a kind of one-off payment for a couple of years on keeping the NHS going for a day, yeah, it's definitely not worth it. My recent escapades in the NHS have not given me any hope for it. It needs root and branch reform, which Labour kept saying they were going to do, and as it turns out, all they're doing is throwing more money at it with absolutely no agreement that the NHS will improve its management. So, yeah, as far as I'm concerned, people have every right to get annoyed at this, because all it's doing is feeding into bigger problems. People are fed up with paying tax to get absolutely nothing in return out of it, because, you know, there was news out today from the ONS that the public sector have actually got less productive over this year, or over this quarter, I can't remember. And what do they get for that? They get the largest pay increase that the country has ever seen. So yeah, people are pretty annoyed that they're being forced to pay tax for all this.
Well, have you seen...
Are you listening to this?
Have you tried to get a GP appointment lately?
Yes,
Right.
I just recently had a heart attack.
Okay.
Yeah, this is kind of Jeremy Clarkson's point, though. This is to fund public services, aren't they bad? Yeah, I don't think punishing farmers is going to help.
Okay, so you know it's tough.
Yes.
So where should they get the money from if it's not from farmers?
From farmers.
You
hear that, everyone?
With
BBC
assets.
thinks you should be paying for everything.
It's so funny. It's where the leftists go to all the time, which I'm happy to say the BBC is a part of. Every time, it's, public services are terrible. Clearly, they just need more money. Where are they supposed to get the money from if not from farmers? And it's never the other way round of, maybe they should just have cuts. Maybe there should be more efficiency here. Maybe, London paying over £100,000 a year for a night czar who only works 2 days a week and basically spends most of her time abroad, maybe that's a bit of a waste of money. Maybe all these diversity officers, maybe that's a bit of a waste of money. And Jeremy Clarkson goes into it, by the way.
Do you know how many people pay inheritance tax in this country?
It's 4% of estates.
What?
4% of estates.
4% pay inheritance tax. 96% of the population of the UK does not pay inheritance tax.
Sure.
After this becomes law, 96% of farmers will.
Just to clarify, because Clarkson is absolutely done with the BBC because clearly they were just trying to attack him, he has absolutely no problem with just making things up on the spot. But I may as well make this actually informative. According to the NFU, it estimates that about 75% of farm businesses could be affected by the new tax. which has obviously clashed with the government's claim that, oh, it's only going to be about 4% of farms actually affected by this. Now, as long-time viewers of this channel will know, I absolutely hate unions. However, the Farmers' Union appears to be a bit of an exception in this case, because the NFU isn't just an extension of the Labour Party. The NFU seems to actually be a bit of an extension of the dry parts of the Tory Party, and possibly now parts of Reform. Because farmers are pretty much overwhelmingly Tory voters, because obviously Labour are much more for the city folk, and farmers are absolutely not city folk. So obviously this is an estimate, and they're open that this is an estimate, but obviously I am going to trust this estimate a lot more than Labour's estimate, because Labour keep showing themselves to be liars, and I don't see why I should trust them in this case. But anyway, that was just to clarify that it's not going to be 96%, as Jeremy Clarkson says. It's going to be closer to 3/4, which is still a substantial amount of them.
Where have you got that figure from?
Who here, can I just ask, who here is going to be unaffected by these changes? No one.
Right.
Just to labour that point there, Jeremy Clarkson's point to Victoria Derbyshire here is to say, I have now done more sampling than what the government has done. And obviously this is a process where people are obviously going to be affected by this inheritance tax. And so obviously 100% of people there are going to be affected by it, obviously. So again, he's just making the point to Victoria Derbyshire that 13,000 farmers turning up there, that is obviously more than 4% of farmers in the country. In fact, I just had a quick look at the statistics. There are 108,000 farmers in the country, and so already the claim of, oh, it's only going to affect 4% is demolished by the fact that 10% of farmers on estimate are actually there at the farmers' protest. So I suppose, well done, BBC, for getting that instantly wrong.
Where have you got the 96% figure
Well,
from?
you've got 96%. Well, the same place that Rachel Reeves does, from the middle of her head.
Don't get me wrong here, these are by no means deep thought-out arguments. This is effectively Jeremy Clarkson's version of lashing out at the BBC. This is pigeon chess. But the thing is that this is Jeremy Clarkson's reaction to effectively being personally attacked by the BBC. I don't blame him for acting like this. He's not going to treat them in good faith, because they instantly didn't treat him in good faith either. So he's just giving tit for tat, which is absolutely fine, because generally, yes, people do not particularly trust the BBC. A lot of people do not like the BBC, and seeing things like this, they just see as entertainment, because he is an entertainer. If they want a serious conversation, they can go to the National Farmers Unions and their representatives. They've come to an entertainer, they're going to get an entertaining interview. Not necessarily fully informed, but as Jeremy Clarkson is making the point here, the government themselves are not being informative, neither is the BBC, so I may as well be just as informative.
Right.
From the Sixth Form Debating Society that she was no doubt a member of,
Okay.
which formed her opinions and yours.
I am not expressing opinions. I'm
Yes.
literally asking you questions. You know that, Mr. Clarkson.
Right.
Again, on a very technical level, kind of true. She is not expressing opinions. However, with the line of questioning that first went there, it was definitely of the opinion of Jeremy Clarkson, you are a bad man who is just doing this for selfish reasons, aren't you? Which, you know, there's an implied opinion there, isn't there? And as I say, Jeremy Clarkson is there to be supportive for farmers, and he was fine supporting farmers there, but then obviously he got personally attacked, and so he's just giving personal attacks back, or, well, institutional attacks back, I guess, since he's attacking the BBC, not necessarily Victoria Derbyshire. It's just good to see him being able to be in the position where he can say, I don't care, I am going to speak my mind to you. Whereas a lot of other people have to be a lot more careful with the BBC.
So, what is your message to this government?
Please back down, please.
And get the money from where?
Well, they've got 40 billion.
It's such a pregnant pause because it makes the point perfectly. They are getting 40 billion extra, and that's with government estimates. The actual estimates coming from the ONS are actually a lot lower than 40 billion because, well, people change behaviour when the tax code changes. But the point's being made there. They've got 40 billion. If they can't allocate that properly, then they are useless. That is his point. But Victoria Derbyshire just doesn't know what to say beyond that. Luckily, he says what we're all thinking.
I'll tell you where you go. Walk into any of the offices around here. If you don't understand what somebody's job is, fire them.
And it's a shame that that's at the end of the clip, because everyone will obviously see the pigeon chess before that, but he actually gets to a really insightful and good point there. Yes, the civil service is clearly over-bloated to the point where they are going to go on strike if they have to go back into the office. And trust me, I know people in the civil service. I know quite a few of them whose job is just nonsense. Again, Britain ran India with about 300 civil servants. There's absolutely no need to have tens, if not hundreds of thousands of civil servants. The armed forces have more civil servants working for them than actual armed personnel. It's absolutely ludicrous. Obviously, these things can be streamlined. Guess whose plan that was? Reforms. Vote reform.
Civil service is too top, you know that. I must get on.
And yeah, once again, saying what we're all thinking, and the added mic drop at the end, the civil service is too top, you know that. Effectively, the civil service is useless, over-bloated, overpaid, not productive. Clearly, we can do something about it, you know that too. So don't ask me questions about where's the money going to come from. The money is going to come from making it more efficient, not going to come endlessly from the public and the private sector. But idiot MPs had something to say about this. Jonathan Brash, Labour MP, said, "Man who claims to be fighting for people's livelihoods demand that people's livelihoods are ended. If your livelihood is to be in the civil service, I beg you, please watch Yes Minister and understand why people really do not care for the livelihoods of people in the civil service, because effectively, it is literally just a job creation scheme where if you stay in there long enough, you end up just being there to extract all the money from the private sector to benefit yourself and your chums. There's entire episodes on corruption in the civil service about how they do their best to effectively try and say, oh, look, this is industry standard to increase our pay by 20%. Look, this is your standard industryman's wage from last year, here it is this year, and it'll turn out to be a hyper-successful private company that ended up paying its board members 20% more because they did so well. It's things like that, and as I say, everyone knows this, so if you're trying to make me feel bad for civil servants' livelihoods, it's not going to work. As I said on Twitter, actually, the civil servants' livelihoods are not worth the bones of your average British farmer, so of course I am perfectly fine with metaphorically Dresdening Whitehall so that we can then make sure that farmers can carry on, actually be profitable and keep generational farming going. In other words, screw Labour, vote reform. Anyway, Mr. Clarkson had a busy day. He was also planning to make a speech, which he did, and it was very good. So good, I'm going to go through it.
Okay, so, as we all know, everyone down there, you know a tractor. £200,000 for a medium-sized one. A combine, £500,000. All the equipment costs a fortune. And if you try to price what you're selling to accommodate that, there's just a lot of moaning.
Yeah, there is an issue pricing up farmers' goods to sell on. It comes with a lot of negotiation, but an awful lot of them do actually get quite shafted by supermarkets especially. But you watch Clarkson's farm as well. I mean, Clarkson has his land agent with him most of the time to help him in dealings and things like this, and it just seems like constant brain power work, and you need to hold on to an awful lot of information and the latest prices for livestock and grain and things like that, as he says, it's a lot of moaning, because there'll be disagreements on which prices to base their agreement on. And as he says, farming equipment is ridiculously expensive because the engineering that goes into it is just absurd. Plus, they're all massive bits of machinery.
You get people saying, well, I shouldn't pay that. I can get a chicken from abroad. Yeah, you can. But it's so full of chlorine, it tastes like a swimming pool with a beak.
I mean, personally, I don't particularly care if my chicken's chlorinated. Obviously, it's an American thing, and I have to say, if chlorinated chicken was actually bad for you, there would be so many suings in America that they would never do it again. And I've had chicken in America. It doesn't taste that bad. But he is a man who is trying to defend British farming, so he's going to use any argument he can. So I don't blame him for this, and I'm not going to lie, it's a good joke.
And the regulations. Some of you down there will know what I'm on about when I say we got a lot of GS4 this year on the farm. And we were told, oh, the sheep will love that. No, they don't. They're standing looking at it in the same way that a 5-year-old looks at an olive.
From what I've just quickly read up on, GS4 is effectively a kind of bean mix that is, in theory, supposed to be very good for sheep and cows. I imagine there's some regulation that says you need to feed them this to make them some sort of standard. And yeah, as Jeremy Clarkson says, they just don't eat it. There's so much regulation in the sector. They have to follow net zero nonsense. They have to make sure they know exactly which animals come from which fathers and mothers, things like that. Endless bureaucracy. And as Jeremy Clarkson says, we do all this work to effectively put meals on people's tables. And what's the thanks we get for it? Your farm's probably going to have to be sold when you die. Clarkson will be up to date on all this stuff because he literally makes documentary TV shows about it. He's constantly told about it by his land agent Charlie, and he knows effectively farming is not only a thankless job, but at this point, being actively punished. People don't want that, yet this government that is on shaky legs is doing everything they can to ruin them.
Now, I know a lot of people all across the country in all walks of life took a bit of a kick on the shin with that budget. You lot got a knee in the nuts and a light hammer blow to the back of the head.
Yeah, because as Clarkson's about to go into, it's not just inheritance tax that they have been ruined on here.
Because we had pickup trucks, double cab pickup trucks, being reclassified as company cars. 211% tax rise there.
And again, I'm going to take his word for it, because this isn't Jeremy Clarkson doing his own research. He will have been told this. This will probably be on Clarkson's Farm 4 by his land agent. I mean, he might be exaggerating the numbers for all I know, but it doesn't matter. The point is that there's a massive tax rise because they're reclassifying farmers' cars.
£50 carbon tax on a bag of fertiliser. The basic farm payments altered in such a way that we're getting a lot less than we thought we were going to get.
So subsidies have been slashed. There's been a 50% carbon tax on bags of fertiliser as well. My God. As he says, this budget, if you go into the minutiae, it's not just the inheritance tax. There's an awful lot more to it as well. The inheritance tax is just the big news because that is what is likely to kill a lot of family farms. That's why it's the big news. Farmers are probably used to having their subsidies slashed and their taxes increased. They're probably used to that, but this one is so bad, massive, 20% if your farmland's worth over $1 million, which estimates for how big a farm that will actually affect tend to vary depending on who you ask. And then there's some technicalities that, actually it's over 3 million because inheritance tax can be split, which, as that turns out, that's a bit of a misnomer as well. So when they try and say it's only going to be 4%, that's why the NFU are saying it's 75%. Yeah, I mean, the tax code in Britain, well, all over the Western world, isn't very good as it is, but when we're at a point where people aren't even really sure if they're going to get hit by this tax, to me that's a hell of a lot worse because you don't have certainty. And in a lot of ways, not having certainty can be a hell of a lot more than knowing what the future holds for you, even if it's bad news.
And then there was the inheritance tax business. Honestly, I don't know where to start. I will just say this. Rachel Reeves has told us, 72% of farms are going to be unaffected by this.
Already, by the way, that is a completely different story to what Victoria Derbyshire was saying, that it's 4%. To be fair, I think that was for the whole of the UK. But even then, if it's affecting a disproportionate amount of farmers, it's hardly a fair tax then, is it? I mean, what am I talking about? Inheritance tax is an unfair tax by its very definition. But personally, this is what I think is the worst part about this particular tax. People just have no idea who it's actually going to affect. They can't even be clear about that because they have to constantly lie. And as I say, that makes uncertainty, and people don't know what they need to do about their money, about their farms, to make sure that they can actually carry on with the family business.
I've just been interviewed by Victoria Derbyshire for Newsnight. Let's see if we can educate her here, if she's still around, Victoria. How many people here, if you'd raise your hands, are from a family farm? I want to see, right. I hope you can see that. I hope we've got our cameras from the show up high to see. That's a lot of hands. Now, keep them up.
I don't have a picture of it, but there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that it would be anywhere above 90% of the people there putting their hands up. Because, believe it or not, this is entirely what the protest is about, so of course they're all there.
And I want you to lower them if you think, and you've had time to work this out, you think you're going to be unaffected by the changes to APR and BPR. Put your hands down if you're going to be unaffected. Thank you. My case rests.
Again, I don't have footage of it, but I imagine that nobody put their hand down. And it is the whole point here. As I say, over 10,000 people turn up to this. That is about 10% of farmers. Okay, they won't all be farmers there, sure, but clearly it's more than 4% being affected. And even then, the estimates are huge. They're thinking about a quarter of people will be affected by it. And then the NFU say, no, actually, it's 3 times that amount, which is just, as I say, absolutely absurd. But anyway, it was a decent speech as usual from Jeremy Clarkson, but then, my God, after it, there were people having a go at him because he showed his face to the cameras and left. You know, he just did it for his own show. He did it for his own nefarious reasons, despite the fact that if you know anything about Jeremy Clarkson and farming, that's just not true. And it's certainly not true in this case because he absolutely was not just going home to have a break. Because as it turns out, Kemi Badenoch had her own press release where she clearly had invited Jeremy Clarkson to come along and talk to her about the issues of farming. Obviously, as well, Kemi Badenoch was present at the protest along with a large number of other Tories, which they would be. They are very much the classical party of the farmers. So there is clearly a united right-wing front here, but weirdly also quite a few left-wing fronts as well. Because even the Greens were on this issue, with the Green Party co-leader Adrian Ramsey urging the government to have another look at its plans to introduce inheritance tax on farmland. Because as much as crazy as the Green Party are, they do understand that rural votes are quite important, and some of their council strongholds are actually in close to rural areas, if not rural areas themselves. So, of course, they're going to want family farms to keep going because some of their voters will be on family farms. But another big player in this was actually the Liberal Democrats, especially with ex-Lib Dem leader Tim Farron, who is here being interviewed by Politics Joe.
I represent 1,500 farmers, and I recognise the narrative out of number 10 is not the truth. The truth is, 440 of the 1,500 farmers will be directly affected by this, and many of them, including the 4 case studies I looked at last night, are living on less than the minimum wage.
I mean, he says they're living on less than minimum wage. What that probably means is that direct income from the farm will earn them less than minimum wage. They probably have to work another job, contracting or something like that, to make up the rest of their income. But still, the point is that farms really aren't massive money makers. It's only on paper they're worth a lot, and when it comes to actually selling the place, you're not necessarily going to get the, say, 3 million that it's worth on paper, because people don't want to buy farms for 3 million if they're only making £3,000 a year.
And that doesn't include hundreds of tenant farmers who are indirectly affected by this, because you have a kind of a whole restructuring of businesses following this kind of announcement. It just leads to eviction. So the consequences are that the poorest farmers will be hit by this, the wealthiest will just find a way around it because they always do.
Which is definitely going to be the legacy of this Labour government, where they've brought in a lot of spiteful, especially taxes, but just policy in general. Another example is the private school VAT, where all it ends up doing is absolutely shafting the middle, upper middle, lower middle as well classes. The type that are scrimping and saving to send their kids, say, to private school, or those that are just getting by with their farms, who now have to do a complete restructure, as he says, make completely different decisions, and all it ends up doing is making life worse for them, whereas the very rich, as he says, will just be able to get around it. Jeremy Clarkson even just admits this. This is why he says it's not for himself. He's very, very open about that, and Tim Farron, I don't think he's a farmer, but he is representing them, and that's why he's getting more annoyed than Jeremy Clarkson was. But it's just an amazing united front. You've got Reform agreeing with the Tories, who are agreeing with the Greens to an extent, and who seem to be agreeing with the Lib Dems as well. You have a united front that basically brings together everyone in Parliament, apart from the SNP, to say, this is a bad idea, please change it. But unfortunately they've got 400 seats, so they're probably not going to. But this is absolutely the legacy of, pretty much every socialist country when you think about it. It really helps the oligarchs, whether they mean to or not, and the only way for you not to help these oligarchs is to basically directly kill them, or put them in the gulag. Which Labour aren't doing because, as bad as they are not murderers, at least yet.
What happens at the moment is that when inheritance tax comes upon an estate, the best way to do it very often is to sort of flog off bits of it. So who do you flog it off to? Well, increasingly, it's to private equity, it's to big corporates. And
yeah, you just destroy family farms to help fund multinational corporations who probably aren't going to farm it, might use it as a business expense and not even necessarily even build on it. So it's actually worse in a way. I'd rather you actually do something useful with the land, like build houses on it, rather than just leave it to get decrepit.
When you look look at the sort of headwinds like Ukraine, does it concern you that closing family farms could jeopardise British food security?
That's totally it. So, I mean, so Ukraine, COVID, we've seen a number of instances in the last 5 years where, you know, we've become aware that we're far too complacent about the security of our food supply. We reckon at the moment, 55% of all British food is grown or bred in the UK. That's far too low. We should be at least 10% more than that to withstand shocks and to keep us safe. So
I'm nothing short of impressed with Tim Farron here. As I've been typically saying for the past few years, nobody really knows what Lib Dem policy is, but if this is the sort of thing they're talking about, then they're not too bad at least. And even having said that, it is good to finally see Ed Davey, the current leader of the Lib Dems, actually stand up and actually make political points rather than just having fun on slip and slides.
We are going to fight for our rural communities. We're going to fight for support for farmers. We're going to fight to stop this family farm tax.
That's what I mean by this. This is a united front of both left and right saying this is absolutely absurd. Please rethink it, Labour. But Labour are fully on board with the unions that they are in cahoots with, which they have to be a member of to become an MP, by the way. And everyone else who, pretty much everyone against this, will know farmers. And they all know that this is ridiculous, this is going to negatively affect them. If they are going to avoid paying this 20% tax, they have to do a massive restructuring, start looking into trusts, hire solicitors, things like that. And it's just absolutely all pointless. And the thing is that even Labour themselves, idiotically, basically came out and said, yeah, just avoid it then. This is what Rural Affairs Minister Daniel Zeichner has told the Times Radio, that they can actually avoid paying the tax with a bit of planning. Why is a minister bringing in a tax to raise money saying just avoid it? So speaking, he said, tens of thousands of family farms across the country will not be affected by this, but obviously tens of thousands others will. And of course, with a bit of planning, no inheritance tax will be payable at all. A Labour minister is telling people, we have put this in place and you can just avoid it. What? Why put the tax up in the first place then? So we're absolutely determined to protect the family farms by telling them how to avoid a tax we've put in place. But what we have been seeing is people coming in, buying up land for purpose of tax avoidance, and that does absolutely happen. And there is absolutely a way that you could have made this policy without affecting family farms and only affecting these people. And even then, as I say, why not just have no inheritance tax? Oh, because your money belongs to us. Leftists have been calling it a tax break for farmers. No, inheritance tax should not exist. There are other countries where it doesn't exist because they obviously see it as immoral. I believe Australia is one of them. Clearly, you don't need it to have a functioning country. And we just don't think that it's the right thing for the future of the farming sector or the right thing in general for the public. Okay? Everyone else has to pay inheritance tax, and we think we should clamp down on these tax avoidance. This is one of our ministers. As I've been saying for ages, we have the worst elites possible now. First thing he says, oh, just avoid the tax. Last thing he says, we want to crack down on tax avoidance. Oh, it's all so tiresome. Anyway, I've been talking a bit about leftists, so we may as well start talking about them. Recently, Novara Media basically asked, are we so out of touch with the normies and median voter? And if you watch my last video on that, they basically unironically did the Skinner meme where they said, no, it's the median voter who's wrong, we need to persuade them to our side. Anyway, having said that, they keep acting out of touch, and this was a clip that they were trying to push from when Ash Sarkar was doing a bit of a vox pop. Yeah, if you found it hard to hear, I mean, they have subtitles. This was a guy saying, oh, look, another immigrant like me, looking at Ash Sarkar. To which, obviously, I think everyone knows about that tweet where she tells people to F off because she's not British. And obviously there's that famous clip of her saying, we're winning, lads, when the demographics of London are becoming less white British and more minority ethnic. Clearly, Ash Sarkar is someone who sees ethnicity along racial lines, and then gets upset when other people effectively have the same idea and throw it back in her face.
I'm from Novara Media. I was just going to ask, how do you think...
I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to some real people.
Yeah, I'm basically with Lee Anderson here. Novara Media they're just not worth talking to. Partly because they're alternative media, but mostly because they are dishonest alternative media. I'm obviously all for talking to alternative media because I am alternative media. But if I were someone like Lee Anderson, I'd be doing the same thing. I'm not going to talk to you. You are dishonest, famously a bad faith actor, and you're not going to be worth my time because you don't give me a bigger platform as, say, the BBC, who I will, even though they are bad faith, give time to.
Communists.
That was what you said.
Would you like to
call yourself a communist?
Sorry, overbreeding of my sort?
No, you're YouTube. There we go. I don't want to speak.
See what I mean? So at first she's been called an immigrant, which I don't think she's ever self-referred as an immigrant, but she has said she's not British, and if you're here in Britain and don't consider yourself British, what else do you call yourself? You know, okay, you're not technically an immigrant because you were born here and raised here, however, if you don't see yourself as British, you know, what do you do with that? So she already had a bad faith problem with that, but now the man said, oh, you're a communist, your sort are overbreeding, which, you know, she's jumped on it thinking, oh, he means brown person. In reality, I think he was meaning bad faith communist YouTuber, because he never brings up her skin colour again. And the guy said he's an immigrant. It's possible that English isn't actually his first language. But as I say, this is how Ash Sarkar is a bad faith actor. She makes the least charitable interpretation ever, doesn't try and probe for open questions or things like that, just go straight to, basically, you're a racist, aren't you?
Sorry, you said overbreeding of my sort. What did you mean by that? Overbreeding of my sort, sir. You also called me an immigrant earlier.
Yeah, this is classic Ash Sarkar MO. Oh, he called me names earlier, and as I say, he said immigrant like myself. Again, it's possible English isn't his first language. There's plenty of room to be charitable here. And does Ash Sarkar want to do that? No, because Ash Sarkar is nothing but a grievance grifter. Anyway, Lee Anderson decides that he needs to clarify this situation, calling her a race baiter once again. Here are the facts because you haven't included it in the full conversation. Firstly, the gentleman in the clip told me he was a farmer and an immigrant. At the same time as I was trying to chat with him, you rudely interrupted. I mean, we can see that, to be fair. He made it clear that his overbreeding statement was a direct reference to what you actually said. He was being ironic. I mean, if that might be true, I don't know. But the thing is, I don't know what was said because the Novara Media clip has been cut. So yeah, context has been taken out there. So I'm going to trust Lee Anderson at his word because, frankly, I can see that you have cut just before he starts the overbreeding statement thing. And I'd like to know what you said because you're trying to make out that you were saying it because you're brown. You've had to cut out context to then try and run with that narrative. And frankly, I just don't believe you then. And Lee Anderson finishes off by saying, you have turned it into a race-baiting clique. You are disgusting, utterly shameful. Again, Ash Sarkar's MO, Lee Anderson making a perfect read. I'm going to trust him in what he says then. And the other lefty journalist we're going to go through who actually has something interesting to say about the whole farmers thing is, of course, James O'Brien, who I don't often cover because I find him really annoying, but this content was just too delicious, so let's take a look.
Stop talking over me and let someone who actually knows speak for once, and I know that's difficult for you, James.
Why are you so rude, Charlie? It's not my fault.
Rude.
It's not my fault. You've just made.
You are the rudest person on the radio.
I mean, this is obviously mid-conversation, but yeah, as I say, it's why I can never be bothered with James O'Brien, because as much as he writes a book on how to argue or how to be right in a world gone wrong, how to argue with idiots, things like that, he is the worst person to actually listen to and cover, because he will give out half facts that are just interceded with insults to the other person, and I just can never be bothered with it. But this is a guy giving it back, so I am absolutely fine going through this one.
When a farmer inherits his farm and he can't afford to pay that inheritance tax because it's hundreds of thousands of pounds and he only makes £30,000 a year.
Well, can we crunch the numbers quickly?
That's his home, James.
Can we?
I mean, not only is it his home, it's his entire livelihood. I don't think there's any other type of job where inheritance tax is going to have to make you have a complete career change because the government has decided to slap a 20% bill on you for money that you simply don't have. Even if you sell the farm, you might still not have that money. It's crazy.
Crunch the numbers quickly.
Yeah, by all means.
So hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of tax, presuming, of course, that it's passed from spouse to spouse and then to heir. So it's in excess of £3 million.
Yeah, as I say, the threshold is £1 million, but with some spouse-to-spouse inheritance plus inheritance to the kids. Basically, if it's passed on to the spouse, I don't think any inheritance tax is claimed, but then they get an extra £1 million threshold, and then if that other spouse dies, and pass it on to their kids, but they have another spouse. You could avoid 3 million, but still, as mentioned, an awful lot of farms are worth an awful lot of money because the land that they are on is worth a lot of money to developers on paper. But again, this is an unrealised gain. It would have been much better to instead just have capital gains tax be applied. If it's passed on, you pay no inheritance tax, but then the child obviously doesn't want a farm, so they could sell it. Or they could keep the farm running. And guess what? Guess what happens to farms that keep on running? They pay tax. They pay lots of it, according to Jeremy Clarkson. But now you've put a spanner in those works, so you're going to get less money from farmers' day-to-day taxation to get this 20% tariff on an awful lot of farms that people won't even be able to pay unless they do massive changes to their lifestyle, which, again, how is that fair?
So for hundreds of thousands of pounds at a 20% tariff, regardless of what the figure is, the percentage is 20%. You'd have to be living in an estate worth sort of 6, 7 or 8 million pounds.
No, 4.5 million, James.
No, hundreds of thousands of pounds, you said.
4.5, yeah, exactly.
So that's 1.5 million, 20% of 1.5 million over 10 years.
Yes, but James, you are assuming the rare circumstances where they can avoid the £3 million threshold. Most farmers are probably going to have to pay have the £1 to £2 million threshold. But even then, his maths is wrong. If you have £1.5 million that is taxable at 20%, that's £300,000. So he's crunched the numbers, but for some reason he's crunched them wrong and assumed that 20% of 1.5 million isn't £300,000. That's actually really odd that he's got that maths wrong.
Yeah, and how are you going to pay that?
40% for everybody else.
How are you going to pay that when you earn 25 grand a year?
Yeah, I mean, this is the point. As I say, 1.5 million, even in the best case scenario for this inheritance tax. You have to pay 30 grand a year for 10 years, and as this farmer says, they don't make much. You know, they make a profit of 25 grand. Some of those profits have to invest into next year's crops, but now you need to pay 30 grand as well. It's got to be impossible. But James O'Brien here, who lives in his leafy suburbs and sits in his warm studio to have a go at people all day, he doesn't know any of this. He is a man who is incentivized to try and win arguments by any means necessary and not care about the facts. So this farmer on the phone telling him that he is wrong, he's not having any of it because he needs to win the argument. James O'Brien has something in his head that says, I can never be wrong. And it makes him turn into an idiot every time he's on the radio.
How can you possibly be arguing? Charlie, Charlie.
My house is protected. When a farmer inherits his farm, his house is at risk.
Yeah, it's pretty common for farmers to live on the land that is part of their farm. Again, I know farmers. I know they do this. But this guy clearly lives in a house off farmland, so passing it on is on a completely different type of inheritance tax, so it's a different conversation. But no, farmers now have a house as part of their inheritance tax. So yeah, it's a big problem, as he says.
Why don't you sell some stuff?
Like what, James?
Well, some of your land.
Who's going to buy it? Who's going to buy it?
I mean, it's very much a let them eat cake moment, really. It's, they've got millions of pounds. Why can't they, millions of pounds in land value? Why can't they just sell it? And it's this guy says, who's going to want to buy somewhere where you're just going to be able to build a few houses that's going to be next to farmland? And if it's farmland that is for livestock, that stuff smells. Trust me, I own horses. I know how much it can smell.
I don't know. Lots of people are trying to buy land. We spoke to.
That's the funny thing.
This guy on my phone is my favourite person ever. All right, James, you're giving me a solution. Just sell your land. Who's going to buy it? I don't know. People are asking to buy land all the time. Yeah, but selling farmland is quite a bit different, especially when it's in, say, a national park. And to sell that land, obviously, people are going to actually struggle to buy on it. So it's going to be worth less there as well. But on paper, it's still worth quite a lot. It's just a ridiculous thing to say. Why should these people have to sell their land to fund the NHS for an extra 24 hours a year? It's just not reasonable.
The farmer's not going to buy it,
John.
are they?
John's going to buy it. John is going to buy it.
John's going to build solar panels on it.
John, I don't know what he's going to do with it, but he's going to. But you asked me who was going to buy it, which you don't recognise. You're shouting at me again.
Panels. We've had the offers for wind farms.
Well, there you go. Then what are you complaining about?
Because we don't want to concrete over the land. I know you're a townie. I know you're happy living in your liberal elite world of London.
James O'Brien just completely missing the point again. oh, just sell your land. See, people want to buy it for solar panels. It's like, yeah, but there's a lot more to this than just the money. They've had entire life plans, which their kids have also had. You know, they've got their futures set out ahead of them. And then Labour come in and say, okay, yours 20% now. And now it's basically impossible for them to actually live that life that they've been effectively groomed for. And you're saying, oh, sell the land, but, you know, put solar panels there. And, you know, this guy's saying, okay, we've had the offers for it, but, you know, how long's that realistically going to last? Okay, one person dies. Okay, you sell a bit of land, 20% of your land, whatever, for solar panels. Okay, then the next person dies. You need to do the same thing. 20% of your land, solar panels go up. The reality is that your generational farms are maybe going to last a couple of generations, sorry, because the profits are already razor thin. And then as your farm gets smaller and smaller and smaller, your profits get smaller and smaller and smaller, and then it gets harder and harder to make money to the point where you just sell your farmland off. And James O'Brien's here thinking that, you know, his beef Wellington that his chef makes for him, you know, that beef just comes from Argentina or something and always will do. But as Tim Farron says, there's a lot of value, especially with how high tension the world is right now, to having food security.
But for us, the countryside is the countryside. It's where our food comes from, James.
So you've been offered...
You seem to have forgotten that.
You
seem to have forgotten that, haven't you, James?
Yeah, I totally get Charlie's frustration here, to be quite honest with you. 20% of all farmland over the next generation gets sold off for development, solar panels, what have you. That means 20% of the arable land, the agricultural land, is gone. That, you know, by that metric, 20% of our food is going to have to come from somewhere else. And then 44% of our food will be homegrown. And then that gets 20% less. Then the next one gets 20% less. Next generation, 20% less, until it's basically zero. But James O'Brien doesn't care about that. He is a pure materialist, doesn't understand the psychic profit in actually having food security, and therefore thinks it's absolutely fine. Oh, solar panels, great. You can make the money off that and pay it. What's the problem with that? It's like... Because there's a lot more to this conversation than just the pure money and tax bill aspect. You know, they're not even touching upon the morality of it, but my God, imagine trying to tell James O'Brien that taxation is theft. He'd have an aneurysm.
You can't accept it.
Okay, mate, I'm going to have a
I'm not your mate. I hate you. I think you're an idiot.
Okay.
I think you're a lefty, liberal, woke idiot.
Okay, Charlie.
See, the problem here is that because Charlie has lost his mind at this absolute moron, he thinks he's won. Oh, he started shouting and ad hominem. That means I've won. When, my God, I don't know what it is, but I used to think like this. Oh, I've made them angry, therefore I've won. No, it's a moronic place to be in. Like, seriously, ad hominems and just any insults, they're childish, sure, but they don't say whether your argument was right or wrong. They don't say whether you won the argument or not. But this is why I hate covering James O'Brien, because all he tries to do is try and goad out reactions like this, because it's how he makes his money. Which is why it's then really ironic when he writes books on how to argue, because he's not very good at it. He just says the type of things that try and annoy people, to get them to get reactions like this, and then he says, haha, I won the argument. Honestly, it's pathetic.
Tarmac the AOMBs. Let's tarmac them. Yeah, get some solar farms on there. Yeah, why not, James? Hey, James, you like immigrants. You probably want to see some homes there as well, don't you?
I mean, the idea that this was ever going to be a productive conversation is just out the window. It's James O'Brien. So, yeah, Charlie's just getting all his points across when he can. Because, yeah, I'd be pretty annoyed at someone just saying, oh, just sell 20% of your farm. What's the issue? Because it shows such a fundamental lack of understanding of the nuances of the argument that it's pointless even trying to explain them to him, because he's got no interest in trying to understand the other side. He only has an interest in trying to effectively troll them, because it's how he makes his money.
Well, down with Holmes.
When was the last time you went to a farm?
I grew up on a working farm. I probably should have mentioned that sooner. I grew up just outside Kidderminster in Worcestershire. The farmers are all around Chaddesley, Corbett and that area.
So what, your dad was a farmer?
No, I've explained several... Do you listen to this programme?
No, James, barely anyone does. Hence, barely anyone knows that you grew up around a farm. Oh, was your dad a farmer? No. Okay, you can grow up around farms and not understand farming. I didn't really understand farming despite growing up near them until I moved to Wales. And, you know, Clarkson's farm, that has been a massive educational resource for an awful lot of people about what farming's really like, to the point where farmers wrote to the BBC basically asking, why can't you make Countryfile like this, where it's actually informative about farming and its issues? It's incredible, but James O'Brien obviously doesn't watch that and has just made ridiculous assumptions about what farming's really like, to the point where he's effectively saying down with the kulaks.
So when you... No, I don't.
Well, how can you have such strong...
I think you're an idiot.
How can you have such strong views about me, then?
James, I'm not being funny, but I don't listen to your show, but I see clips of you every now and then, and I've seen quotes of what you've said, and it's not difficult to come to the conclusion that you're an idiot.
Because the few times I have listened to you, I heard how you speak to people. You talk over them and cut them off, like you've done to me.
Down with that sort of thing, Charlie?
I have to say I'm on Charlie's side, but obviously James O'Brien's saying, oh, but you're doing that right now, Charlie. Yeah, because he knows that you do it, so he's just being the louder one here. And now you're giving up and pretending you don't do it. It's so funny.
You are down with that, I know. That's what you
I
love.
mean down with talking over people and shouting at them.
Oh, I'll shout at you. I'll give you everything that you try and give me.
I've tried to give you a fair hearing.
You haven't. You haven't at all.
I mean, you got your basic maths wrong. I don't know about that. You were corrected a few times, and then once again you started getting rude. You can say it's a fair hearing because he's been on the show, but you are hardly a person who tries to understand the other side, aren't you, James? Anyway, that's about as productive as that conversation got, but it is very good to hear someone act like James O'Brien to James O'Brien. Anyway, to finish off, I think I'm just going to go through a quick clip of someone in the mainstream media effectively asking Keir Starmer if he's happy with what his legacy is, what I said it was before, where it's effectively trying to punish the private sector, middle class and upper class, and having unintended consequences that nobody likes. Here's his ex-friend of Labour, Beth Rigby.
In your tax decisions, you've targeted people who send their kids to private schools, people who earn income from assets, landowners, small business owners. There's a pattern here. Is it a class war for you?
No, absolutely not.
Well, once again, just nobody believes this. I don't know. I have no idea why they think this, but an awful lot of the Labour cabinet seem to think that their words matter more than their actions. No, your actions obviously matter more. You have all these people coming out saying about pretty much every tax policy so far it's class warfare, siphoning private sector money straight to the public sector. And every time they just say, no, it's to have a greater, fairer society. Look, we've upped minimum wage, and now all businesses are saying, okay, we're going to have to cut jobs here, I'm afraid. But they don't care. Because to them, all that matters is the rules that they set rather than any of the consequences. And that's why they end up in stupid positions they've ended up in. It's not even 6 months. And if they didn't have such a stonking majority, they would literally be collapsing. But this is going to be a hell of a fight.
It's not a class war.
No, it's not. And let me just take one of those examples, which is the VAT on private schools. I do know that people watching this will save hard to send their child to a private school because they think that's the best thing for their child. But every single parent wants opportunity and aspiration for their child.
So why are you punishing the people who are successful at that then? Everyone wants what's best for their child. Yes, I agree. Certainly most people do. I won't say everyone. But just because not everyone can afford private school doesn't mean that it is justified to tax them. As mentioned, nowhere else in the world does this. Greece tried it and had to revert it within months because of the second-order effects it was causing. It was basically costing the Greek government millions because all of a sudden you had a load of private school kids being brought out of private school, put into the state sector, and they couldn't afford it. But as I say, Labour are just loony-eyed leftists going straight for equality as quick as they can get away with, and nobody likes it. Because at the end of the day, equality is absolute nonsense, and in an awful lot of ways, unjust.
And up until now, we haven't had the right number of teachers in basic subjects like maths, etc., in our state secondary schools. I'm not prepared to tolerate that for our state schools.
I don't tolerate the fact that we don't have enough teachers, therefore I'm going to punish the people who are in positions where they do have enough teachers. This is what I mean by equality is immoral, it's unjust. You're having to drag these people down to a sector which you yourself admitted is worse. And you might say, well, we've got plans to improve it, but from all the numbers I've seen, basically what this tax is going to do is allow the funding of about 2,000 more teachers, whereas thousands of more pupils are going to have to go to the state sector, and in doing so put even more pressure on where they're going to need even more teachers, and the teaching quality is going to get even worse. They don't care, though. They just don't want people doing better than others.
What's your message to wealthy people who thinks you are waging a class war against them? What's your message to them?
Now hang on, I hardly consider myself a wealthy person, and even I can see that there's a class war issue here. So what's your message to me as well?
That's how some people feel.
Look, it isn't at all what we're doing. It's a balanced approach. We had to fill a black hole which was left by the last government. We had to make sure we stabilised our economy. And we've invested, and I think the vast majority of people know that we had to invest in our NHS.
Ending it there, I'm not listening to this nonsense anymore. It's always, oh, we need to fund our NHS. You and your health secretary were promising reforms there, and now we're getting absolutely none. And instead you are just throwing money at it, saying, oh, it was all fully funded. Oh no, we had this black hole, which was complete nonsense. The OBR basically said it was complete nonsense without directly saying it. You clearly had other plans here. It's no wonder people feel cheated by you. Businesses are now turning against you despite the fact they were pretending to be on your side because they thought you wouldn't screw around with the economy. It turns out you have. You have ground it to a halt down to 0.1% growth, which in turn the ONS has said, oh, GDP per capita has actually gone down, plus inflation's gone up to 2.7%. It's unironically worse than when Truss was in charge. Just every metric is worse. And yet you still have journalists that won't say that because it's too low status. But it's good to see that they have finally seen you in charge and realise, oh my god, I think they're actually worse than the Tories. So it's going to be another 4 years of this, I say. Look forward to it, but pressure from the farmers is absolutely a good thing. And it is quite clear that there is overwhelming support for the farmers, so they should absolutely continue what they're doing. And it's good that there's a united front on this from all other parties, because Labour are going to go out, and that basically means that instantly farmers are going to finally not have to worry about the ridiculous inheritance tax. They just got to last 5 years. They'll make it. Anyway, I think I will leave it there, so shill time. Saturday, it's Laughing at the Guardian, so do look forward to that. Monday, it'll be the Antiquity stream, carrying on with the Peloponnesian Wars. And next Tuesday, it's going to be Tosh Talks. I don't know what the topic is yet, but do look forward to that. Videos out as and when I can make them. Right, with that, please do become a subscriber, do become a member, do give super chats and super thanks. They all help the channel out very much. And with that, as I said, that's everything I had for you for today. So once again, thank you very much for watching. And until next time, goodbye.